The glass walls of RavenTech headquarters usually glittered like a promise of safety, prosperity, and progress. But on one stormy Friday evening, those same walls reflected flashing red and blue lights, sirens cutting through the rain. The city was watching. Inside, people whispered in fear, hearts pounding, their company's sleek lobby suddenly transformed into a stage for something raw, terrifying, and unforgettable. At the center of it all was not the CEO, not the well-dressed executives, not even the armed police officers outside, but the janitor. A quiet man named Samuel Hayes, who had spent years sweeping corridors, changing light bulbs, and blending into the background. No one ever expected Samuel to be the one to hold steady when everyone else broke. But that night, under the shadow of a robbery gone horribly wrong, he would do something that shocked not just his coworkers but the entire world. The robbery started quickly, almost too quickly for anyone to process. A group of masked men burst through the revolving doors, their shouts echoing across the marble floor. Guns in hand, they demanded everyone get down. Phones slipped from trembling fingers, heels scraped against the tile as employees scrambled to hide. Fear swept through the building like fire through dry grass. Among the terrified crowd was Evelyn Reed, the young, ambitious CEO of RavenTech. She had worked her way up with grit and vision, and many admired her sharp leadership. But in that moment, sitting against the wall with her employees, clutching her phone before it was snatched away, she was just another person praying to survive. The robbers weren't subtle. They wanted money, valuables, and above all, control. Shoving employees, barking orders, smashing glass cases, they made sure fear would paralyze everyone. And for the most part, it worked. Executives who once led board meetings now whimpered. Interns who dreamed of bright futures sobbed. But then there was Samuel. While others cried or froze, Samuel didn't. He stayed strangely calm, his weathered hands resting on his knees, eyes steady. He didn't look away from the chaos, but he didn't flinch either. His quiet presence began to draw attention, not from the robbers, who dismissed him as just the janitor, but from his coworkers who couldn't understand how he remained so composed. Evelyn noticed too. From across the room, through her fear, she locked eyes with him. And in that fleeting moment, his calmness steadied her heartbeat. Until that night, most of RavenTech barely noticed Samuel. He came in early, left late, and rarely spoke unless spoken to. Many executives knew his name but not his story. He was simply the janitor, invisible in the halls of power. But Samuel's life had not been simple. Years before, he had served as a Marine. He had been through places and moments most people couldn't imagine. He had seen fear, chaos, and pain. And he had learned one thing that never left him: panic never saves anyone. Calmness can. When he returned from service, life hadn't been easy. The transition to civilian life had been rocky. PTSD haunted his nights. Jobs came and went, relationships frayed, but eventually, he found peace in routine, in quiet work, in cleaning spaces and restoring order where he could. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and steady was all he wanted. So when the robbers stormed RavenTech, Samuel's instincts kicked in. Fear was present, yes, but he knew how to push through it. He scanned the room, counted the gunmen, measured their tone, their tension. His calm wasn't ignorance, it was survival wisdom. As the minutes stretched, the robbers grew more desperate. Police had surrounded the building, negotiations were dragging, and tension was boiling. One of the robbers shoved an intern, a young man no older than 22, who whimpered in fear. Another robber screamed at Evelyn, demanding she hand over access codes to the company vault. When she hesitated, the gun pressed harder against her temple. The employees were trembling wrecks. Some whispered prayers, some stifled sobs. The air was heavy with despair. And it was then that Samuel acted. He didn't leap dramatically or tackle anyone. That would have been suicide. Instead, he did something far more disarming. He spoke. In a steady, low voice, he said, "This doesn't have to go this way." The words cut through the panic like a knife. Everyone turned toward him, even the robbers, startled that the janitor dared to speak. For a tense moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the rain outside. One robber barked, "Shut up, old man." But Samuel didn't flinch. "You don't want to kill anyone. I can see that. You just want to get out of here alive. Same as us," he continued, his voice calm, unwavering. The robbers cursed at him, but there was hesitation in their eyes. Samuel had seen that look before, in young soldiers who were more scared than they let on. These weren't hardened killers. They were desperate, reckless men making terrible choices. And Samuel knew if someone didn't steady the storm, blood would spill. Over the next half hour, Samuel kept talking. Not pleading, not bargaining, just steady words, human words. He told them he understood fear, that he too had once been trapped in battles that felt unwinnable. He reminded them that violence would only tighten the noose around their necks. And slowly, unbelievably, the robbers' energy began to shift. Their shouts grew less sharp. Their movements less frantic. One lowered his gun, almost unconsciously. Another began pacing instead of threatening. Evelyn watched this unfold with awe. She had led teams through corporate crises, but nothing like this. She realized Samuel wasn't just calming the robbers, he was calming everyone. The hostages began to breathe again. Hope flickered in the room. At one point, one robber snapped, "Why should we listen to you?" Samuel met his eyes and said quietly, "Because I've been where you were, thinking I had no way out. But there's always another way. You just have to choose it." The words landed heavier than anyone expected. After nearly 2 hours, negotiations outside stalled, but inside, Samuel had become the quiet mediator. He persuaded the robbers to let go of the youngest interns, convincing them it would reduce the heat. The hostages left sobbing but alive. He convinced them to lower their weapons when police negotiators approached through the loudspeakers. Step by step, he walked them away from the edge of tragedy. Finally, exhausted and defeated, the robbers surrendered. No one was hurt, not a single life was lost. And as the police rushed in, reporters swarmed outside, and employees cried in relief. All eyes turned to Samuel, the janitor who had saved them all, not with force, but with calm, steady courage. The story exploded. Within hours, news channels ran headlines, "Janitor prevents bloodshed in tech robbery." Clips of shaken employees praising Samuel's bravery went viral. Evelyn Reed herself stood in front of cameras, voice trembling as she said, "He didn't just save lives. He showed us the power of calm and humanity in the darkest moment." Samuel, however, shied away from the spotlight. He told reporters, "I'm no hero. I just did what needed to be done." But the world thought otherwise. People shared his story online, parents told their children about the janitor who stayed calm under fire, and veterans reached out to thank him for representing their strength with dignity. Evelyn, deeply moved, knew she couldn't let his actions fade into a headline. She invited Samuel to her office a week later. For the first time, they sat across from each other not as CEO and janitor, but as equals bound by shared survival. "You changed this company, Samuel," she told him softly. "You changed me. I used to think leadership was about titles and strategies. But you taught me it's about presence. About courage when it matters most." She offered him a new role, not out of pity, but respect. A position in the employee relations, helping build in resilience, mentoring staff, and sharing his story. Samuel hesitated, but eventually accepted. Not for recognition, but because he realized his experiences could give others strength. Of course, life after the robbery wasn't simple. Samuel still battled his old demons. The robbery triggered memories of war he thought he had buried. Nightmares returned. Crowds overwhelmed him when strangers recognized him. He questioned whether he deserved the praise, whether he had simply been lucky. Evelyn, too, faced challenges. The board worried about the company's image, lawsuits loomed, and employees struggled with trauma. She wrestled with balancing corporate responsibilities with the human side of leadership. Together, though, Samuel and Evelyn became unexpected allies. She leaned on his wisdom when dealing with frightened employees. He leaned on her encouragement when doubts crept in. Their bond became a symbol within the company. The CEO and the janitor, learning from each other, rebuilding trust and hope. Months later, at a conference about leadership, Evelyn invited Samuel to join her on stage. He stood awkwardly at first, uncomfortable in the spotlight. But when he began to speak, the room fell silent. "I was just a janitor that night," he said. "Most people didn't even know my name. But fear doesn't care about titles. Courage doesn't either. We all have moments when we can choose to panic or to be calm. And in those moments, our choice can save lives, not just in robberies, but in everyday battles we all face." Cheers welled in many eyes. Applause thundered. And the world finally understood what Evelyn already knew. Samuel's story wasn't about one night in a lobby. It was about the quiet power we all hold, the power to stay steady when storms rage. The robbery at RavenTech became more than a crime story. It became a parable of resilience, humanity, and the unexpected places where leadership emerges. The CEO who once thought strength came from authority discovered it in the humility of a janitor. The janitor who once thought his purpose was only to clean discovered it in the calmness that saved lives. And the world, watching, realized something unforgettable. Heroes don't always wear suits, badges, or uniforms. Sometimes, they carry a mop, walk quietly through hallways, and wait for the moment when their steady heart can change everything. Because courage, in its truest form, is not the absence of fear, it's the calm that rises above it.